Hello and welcome to Even the Trunchbull, our show about children's books and why we still love them as adults.
She's Nina.
They're Matt.
And we think that children's books are for everyone, because we've all been kids. Even the Trunchbull.
They're all mistakes, children. Filthy, nasty things. Glad I never was one.
Trunchbull from Roald Dahl's beloved Matilda, despite her protestations. Each episode we'll be reviewing one picture book and one chapter book. We're starting off with the books that we read as kids, but if you've got a book you'd like us to review, especially if you are currently a kid, please get in touch.
You can email us on eventhetrunchbull@gmail.com or catch us on Twitter @TrunchbullPod. This week we're reading Do Is Dak by Carson Ellis and The Giants and the Joneses by Julia Donaldson, which both feature brilliant made-up languages. Let's kick things off by reading the first few pages of Do Is Dak to get a feel for the language. Do Is Dak, Manazoot. Tata. Do Is Dak, Ma Ebedau Unk Plonk. Du Kenner Plonk. Manazoot. Ru Bada Unk Ribble. So, that's the insect language.
Very well read.
Thank you, I've practiced. So I discovered this book when my mum, who's trying to break into literary translation, was given it as a task on a workshop. So they gave all these translators just the text of this book and not the pictures, and had them try to guess what language it was. What do you think of it?
It's really, really interesting. I think when I first read it, which was with you the other week, I didn't understand the language at first.
Were you able to follow the story?
Just about, but again, maybe on first reading, not quite. But it's really interesting because it's that kind of like bilingual experience.
It's much more plasticity around language in kids' brains, definitely, before the age of 6.
I guess because you haven't learned the rules around that communication structure yet.
And I think once you get past 6, you get really attached to the syntax of your own language, I think, mainly, more than the sounds and the words.
Right.
You get used to
word order.
And I think this book really makes room for that. So on first reading it looks really obscure, but actually the word order, the sounds are all very English. There's capitalization for names and the verbs go in the same place. Actually, I think this is why it needed to be translated into other languages, is they needed to make up other made-up words that
because you said this is the English version of insect language, and then there are other, which is really, really interesting. I mean, it reads quite German to me. It's quite Germanic. Yeah,
in the sounds. But in the syntax, it's very English.
Yeah, that's true, actually. That's true.
So they'd have to move the words around to make it feel German to a German kid.
Because once we went through it, so we read through it a second time, and it's like, yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And you can kind of figure it out.
I think it really bears a lot of repetition reading. Like, if you had it with a little kid and you went over it over and over again, I think that's really where it would shine. As a one-off, I think it's difficult. And there's a lot of repetition, so the vocabulary of the insect is not that big, and you see most words several times.
I've just clocked his little... It's very, very rereadable. Literally every time I've read this book. So the first time I was like, okay, cool, nice pictures, don't really know what's going on. And then reading through again, because okay, cool, got the language. Just reading it now, because this butterfly appears right at the end. The butterfly's there the whole time. It's just this little cocoon. And the first page, you've got this little...
Caterpillar saying, ta-ta!
Ta-ta, which is goodbye.
Yeah.
And then it's just there in a cocoon throughout the whole...
In every picture. It's just there.
Yeah, and I totally missed it. Oh, that's really sweet. And the pictures are beautiful.
Yeah.
Just sort of like mix of kind of collage and drawing. So the first page is a little dragonfly with a walking cane pointing at a sprout that's sprouting out of the ground. Another little dragonfly with a handbag with a hand over the mouth. So you get the body language of, what's that? Oh, I don't know.
I also like that there are a lot of pages with no words at all. That time I watched you read it, you actually stopped short at the end because it had run out of words, but there were 3 or 4 more pages of drawings.
Yeah. In which, everything's died and then starts to grow again. Makes sense it being insects as well, right? I'm thinking, because it's about noticing things that you wouldn't notice at first. Little things close to the ground, and the fact that loads and loads is happening that you have to look closely to see. It's very simple, but like, as you say, like the more you read it, the more kind of little things there are to notice that, again, maybe kids would kind of notice much quicker than a silly adult would.
And I think the language is very appealing to me, like the silly sounds, like that a terrible spider is a booby booby.
It sounds great, doesn't it? It's very onomatopoeic. It's like...
Or like a wonderful flower is a scrivadelli gladenboot.
Yeah, which is just lovely to say.
Yeah.
Lovely to hear.
Yeah.
And again, the repetition.
Yeah, a child could read this to themselves after a few reads.
There's a flower which wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And then the word gladenboot is there like 18 times.
Yeah.
Unk Gladenboot is Unk Gladenboot. Unk Gladenboot. Unk Scrivadelli Gladenboot. Ah, Unk Gladenboot. Sue. Is Tak Unk Gladenboot. Unk Gladenboot. It's not 18 times, it's like 7
It's a lot. There's probably about 20 words in the whole thing.
It's actually, and it's a really fun way of, because that's, I mean, I guess like the point at which I learned languages in school is past the point of like brain malleability that we've been talking about. So it's kind of slightly more frustrating anyway, maybe. But one of the like most tedious bits potentially was that repetition.
Yeah.
And this is like, this makes that really fun.
Yeah. Well,
I guess because it's got so many characters.
Yes.
Like,
and so many like fun sounds to make.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's for an age of child where you're really into repetition anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, like 2, 3, 4-year-olds will read the same book over and over and over and over again. And often I think that's really tedious for the adult, but I think this has been written completely expecting to be reread 1,000 times. And what do you think of this book as a poet? Because Carson Ellis is a poet.
That makes sense. It's got the playfulness of poetry. Yeah, and the sort of circling around one topic and like a focus on the small things. I think that's what poetry does really well and what poets are often quite good at.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid reading books, I really loved the made-up language.
Yeah. See, that's something that I got turned on to much later with A Clockwork Orange. It's Anthony Burgess has kind of invented this whole like lingo edging on language, that this sort of like Anglo-Russian mix. And I read that when I was about 16, and it's kind of a real struggle at first, and then you like slip into knowing what those words mean in context, and it becomes like you kind of learn that language as you go through it. So I guess that was my introduction to...
I mean, what age would you say this is for?
Oh, it's dead little, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, 3, 4.
Yeah,
like
or even younger, I'd go like 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the story of the year going past with, the caterpillar and the plants coming out of the ground and then flowering and then dying and then there's nothing and then the sprouts come up again. It's very much about the turning of the seasons, which, when you're 2, a year is a really long time.
It's half your life.
So it sort of condenses that year into just this really short picture book.
What I quite like as well, I'm just thinking now, it's really interesting that there isn't any background to the pages. They're just white pages. And then, as I say, like it's drawings, but it has this feel of collage because it's kind of just like stuck on. But everything's in the foreground. But you get that sense of the seasons through levels of action in the body language. Like, looking here, this is like they're thinking about building the fort. This is like early summer. It's like late spring, early summer. Yeah. And they're like laying back on the leaves. They're like, this is cool. We've got somewhere to hang out. We've found our ladder. What are we going to do like with the summer? But then once we get into winter, like just the talking stops.
Yeah, everyone's gone home.
There's nothing there but the log. And it's got snow on it. And it's kind of the silent. And then the music starts again. The cricket starts playing some music and we move back towards spring. I like it lots.
Yeah, me too. The chapter book for this episode is The Giants and the Joneses by Julia Donaldson, who you probably know from The Gruffalo, The Snail and the Whale and Rim on the Broom. This is one I remember from childhood. Were you at all acquainted with it until I gave it to you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
This is just like a simple, well-told story that's not like feeling the need to try and do anything beyond just tell this story well, and that's great. Okay,
would you like to summarise the plot?
Yes, I'd love
Try not to spoil the ending.
I'm not going to spoil the ending. We start in Giant Land and Mum Giant reading a story to her daughter,
Jumbelia,
who is really the idea of Igglyplops, little people. And basically the story she's being read is Jack and the Beanstalk, which is one of her favourites. And her mum's like, this book's really not cool. Like, there's a lot of really problematic things in this book. Like, someone dies in this, and like it's definitely like the Igglyplop's fault, and that seems to be celebrated. And like, cool, whatever. It's her favourite book. And then we skip to like the human world, where there's some siblings playing in the garden, and we have 2 sisters and a brother. So the youngest one, the little girl, Poppy, who is kind of reads as like very
toddler.
Young. Stephen and Colette. Yes, I think Colette's the eldest.
I think so, yeah.
But yeah, that's not specified, is it? But they're probably sort of more like round 9 or 10 or so.
Yeah.
And yeah, so basically, Jumbelia has a box of beans.
Bimples.
It's so great to have a translator here. And she sneaks off to the edge of Giant Land, which is
called Groyle.
Yes, that's also true. And she goes over the wall of Groyle, which is kind of like it's a city-state, right?
Yeah.
But like in the clouds. And then there's like this edgeland, which I love the description of the edgeland because it reminded me of like round St Mary's Lighthouse, which for anyone who's not from the northeast is like up on the Northumberland coast, sort of just north of Newcastle, and there's like a lighthouse, and it's all kind of rocky, and if you go at the right time, kind of misty, and one of these where like depending where the tide is, you can get out to it.
You can walk out or not, and so you could get stuck as well. Yeah,
and like the way the edgeland's described is like you're beyond the wall, and there's this indeterminate amount of width before like, and it's all misty and rocky and slippy, and at some point the mist stops becoming mist above the ground and it's just clouds and you fall off the edge. And so Jumbelia's playing out there, and so she's got a box of beans, and she's like, well, if I throw enough beans over the edge, like we're going to get some beanstalks, right? And then I can go and like
climb down the Bimplestonk to see the Igglyplops.
And collect stuff, which is a massive thing. So Colette's always like, whether it's like buttons or marbles or like snails in the garden. Stamps. And Jumbelia is the same. She collects stuff. So Jumbelia throws her beans. She does get a beanstalk. She goes down and she's like, cool, loads of like cool playthings and like harvests these siblings among some other stuff. There's a sheep. There's an Igglyblebber goes in there. It's a little sheep.
A little post box.
A little pobo, that goes in.
Yeah. The lawnmower, string chogger.
The string chogger goes in there, like electric, like Dad's prize electric lawnmower.
And they just all go in her pocket.
In like a sack, isn't it? It's like a little sack. And she climbs back up, and she's got a little doll's house, and there's some like plastic toys, and she puts them in with the plastic toys. And they're like, oh my God, this guy's going to eat us. And she's not, she's just like kissing them and all the rest of it. And then it becomes this weird kind of Stockholm syndrome thing where it's like she's captured them, but like if her mum finds them, she's going to flush them down the toilet, right? So it's like they're kind of safe with Jumbelia to some extent. And then it's just the story of them trying to escape. Meanwhile, you've got Throg, who is a giant who's like this older guy. What do they call him? A Rupee poopy plop. A rupee poopy plop. A poor old person.
Yeah.
And he's like a conspiracy theorist who's like, the Igglyplops are coming back and there's going to be an army and they're going to take us over. And so he does like patrols and he's always like harassing the police station and be like, you need to be doing more about this. And they're like, shut up, we've got a job to do.
Giants don't believe in the Igglyplops apart from Jumbelia.
Yeah.
It's an important plot point.
Yeah. Although her brother Zab, when he finds them, I guess it's just like, cool, little moving things that I can torture and stuff because he's all kind of
Zab is awful, isn't he?
He's like that kid out of Toy Story who like sets fire to the toys in the garden.
So Zab steals Stephen, Colette and Poppy off of Jumbelia and tortures them.
Yeah.
Like puts them in the bath and makes them swim, makes them like fight giant insects.
Yeah, which was the most horrifying bit of the whole book. Because the chapter starts with a picture of a wasp in a jar. Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, no. Because Zab's already got him at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Zab's going to put them in that jar with that wasp.
And he puts Stephen in and gives him like a little pin and then starts going, craggle, kill. Yeah. And he's like made to like fight this wasp to the death. And it's interesting as well that it's Stephen that he gets to fight stuff. It's it's quite like Here's
our informal recurring segment, the gender talk.
The gender bit. Yeah, and it's got that going on, like Zab, the male sibling, makes Stephen, the male sibling, fight stuff in a jar.
But also Stephen's like that in these like masculine, like Boy Scout ways, is depicted in a way as like so much more competent. Like, oh, he's the one who can fight the wasp, he's the one who knows the special knots, and he's the one who's really good at swimming. Like, he's given all of these outdoorsy traits.
Yeah, that's true actually. But it is, it's outdoorsy versus indoorsy, isn't it? And it's big versus small. There's a really interesting arc for Stephen, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because he kind of softens through that as well, I think.
Yeah, so Stephen, we open the Joneses part of the book on Stephen being horrible to Colette about her collections.
Yeah.
He is really not kind to his sisters, but then he takes on this like very, I guess, healthy masculine trait of like the protector.
Yeah.
He becomes really responsible for them.
So anyway, Zab's crackers.
Jumbelia manages to get Poppy back off him by doing a swoof.
Oh yeah, which is a swap.
A swapsy. Yeah, so she swaps one Iggly shrimp chugger for one Iggly plop.
And if you can't remember, a shrimp chugger is a lawnmower. That's right.
A chugger that chugs shrimp.
So yeah, all of this going on, and meanwhile Throg is kind of like prowling around like a self-appointed like maverick police officer, trying to like suss it, like he knows something's going on.
And Throg finds the beanstalk.
Yeah.
And douses it in weed killer.
Yeah.
Which means that the Iggly plops don't have a way down anymore.
And I think that's as far as we should go.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's two stories. It's the story of Jumbelia and her family, with her brother Zab and her mum, who is with child, who is going to have a new Bobbalili soon.
Yeah.
And it's a story of the Joneses, Colette, Stephen, and Poppy, who are in this horror film. It's very neat.
It's very well structured. It's very tied together in a way that's quite satisfying. It doesn't feel formulaic. It just feels tidy and well thought through.
Yeah. It's something you wouldn't get away with in an adult book, I don't think, it being that neat.
Yeah, that's true. That's possibly true, actually. Yeah.
You go, oh, that's a bit easy.
Yeah. It's exactly, it's a retelling of a fairy story, isn't it?
It's a really good retelling of Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah, so it's got that easiness and that simpleness of morality up to a point, and then a slight tweaking and twisting of that.
There's just enough of that, isn't there? Because Jumbelia should be the bad guy. She came down and she reaped them and put them in her bag and kept them as toys, but she's not. No. She's just like Colette, and if Colette found little Iggly tiny people, probably she would put them in her doll's house too.
Yeah.
There's really very little judgment of Jumbelia, even when she gets obsessed with her new collection of giant snails and forgets to feed
that
Colette
bit's really interesting, because it's Colette who spots it. She's like, I don't think she even vocalizes it, but it just you get an insight into her thought process. She was kind of scared that Jumbelia would forget that they need to eat and drink, or actually, moreover, scared that Jumbelia would forget that they exist and would move on to that, because she knows her, right? She's like, that's exactly what I would do. I'd be like completely obsessed with these new toys for a bit, and then would come back in like 4 months and be like, oh, they're all dead.
But this is the thing. So it's awful what happened to the kids, but it's not really framed as trauma, is it?
Yeah, but not far off.
No.
She doesn't shy away from that in the writing. Like the bit where, when Colette's nearly starving to death, they find Stephen again, and Stephen's like, oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
I can see your ribs.
Yeah.
It gets pretty real. Like the danger is pretty real, but I think it's played at a really nice level. It is quite intense, but I think you always know it's going to work out. Like it's one of those, like it's written in that way that
there's no chance that like the children die.
It comes pretty. It teases you with it. It's a fairy story, but the levels of jeopardy that are played with. It's a well played level, because I think it's a level that like even little kids would be fine with.
Yeah.
And the jeopardy's never held too long. I think that's the crucial bit, is that...
It's very cleverly done, isn't it? So there's like a really scary bit, and then you go and hang out with Frog.
Yeah.
Or like Jumbelia or Zab.
But it never plateaus at a high tension level for more than a few pages.
Yeah. It's very well balanced in that way.
Yeah.
So you were telling me the other day that you really liked the character of Throg. Do you want to talk about him?
Oh, Throg. He's not a good man.
No.
He's basically like... He's a lonely old bloke, isn't he? And his backstory is gorgeous. And I don't know how much of that I should sort of talk about, because it's a really nice character introduction point part of the way through. But it's kind of explained, like, why he is the way he is from some kind of childhood experiences.
Yeah, why he's so very anti-Igglyplop.
Yeah, and it's just kind of... He's a character who's essentially harmless. Well, no, right, but on a day-to-day level, in the world in which he lives, everyone's just like, oh, poor old man. Yeah. Like, he's just sort of so caught up on this idea. Like, probably people treat him in the way that people shouldn't, but often do, treat like senile people. Whereas Throg's very much like, no, like, there's a war coming.
Yeah.
Right, like, this is really serious. But is, like, not at all equipped to deal with that. Like, he thinks he is, but is basically harmless until he crosses the path of a series of events and then stumbles clumsily through that, doing what he thinks is best, and then kind of sort of inadvertently wreaks a load of havoc for people that he doesn't even know. He's a very sweet man, and he's very misguided. And
he's patriotic is what he is.
He's the old American war vet sitting on his front stoop with a shotgun across his lap.
Yeah, that's who he is. Frog just goes around shouting at people, "Have you seen any Igglyplops today?"
Yeah.
And then he's really cleverly...
He's clever, he's cunning. Yeah.
He's like, how many Igglyplops have you seen?
Yeah, and he catches people out. It's like, oh, I'm going to change this up a bit. I really felt for Throg. And it's a really interesting character arc because it's threaded throughout the whole story and is part of the resolution, as you know, is inevitable because he's the reason for the cut-off of escape. So he's all bound up in that. And he doesn't quite resolve. There's not a kind of like, oh, and then, Throg was changed for the better.
No, there isn't. No.
Throg stays Throg.
Throg retains his value system and his beliefs in general. He just makes an exception.
So, yeah, I mean, we've linked these two books together. The link there is language, isn't it?
Yeah.
Made-up language. Poppy still just learning to learn English.
Yeah.
There's then a bit where the giants have Poppy in a cage. Poppy's kind of being treated like a parakeet almost.
Yeah.
And the dad giant has just had a baby and so is in love with the world.
Yeah.
And is kind of talking to this Igglyplop and realising that it's a baby Igglyplop. And so feels this connection.
He feels really tender to her, doesn't he?
Yeah. And then, it becomes quite important at the end that it transpires that after this experience, Poppy becomes instrumental in the ending. Because she's been able to learn Groylish.
Yeah.
Like, she becomes as fluent in Groylish, basically, as she is in English.
Yeah. If not more so. Like, she's making more complex sentences in Groylish.
That's true, yeah.
Hey, what do you think she's going to do when she comes back to the land of the Igglyplops? She's going to be like, Shrimp Chogger, Petty Spratchkin.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because she'd probably grow out of it, which is
and
quite
people will
sad.
think, oh, it's baby talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. The language is really great. Most of them aren't explained, the words. They're just used as if they were English words when you're in the parts of the story that are about the giants. Yeah. So, like, Midge, the mum, is talking about, like, how she feels about the Bobolili and what she might call it. And it's not explained. You can flip to the back and read what it is in the little dictionary, but you can get it from context. They did translate Throg's songs, though. I really love Throg's songs. What did you think of them? I love Throg's songs, and they did need translating. They did. But what I loved in that was that it had, like, a rhyme scheme and a rhythm. A rumpoche, glay, glay, a rumpoche, glay. Oh, frickly, frickly, bimple stonk, eel cragaloy, fister flay. Which is, around the land I go, around the land I go. Oh, horrible, horrible beanstalk, I will kill you soon.
Yeah, and I love that like the rhyme scheme doesn't fit in English.
Yeah, it fits in Growlish.
It's written in Growlish.
Yeah. I really, really liked the relationship between Stephen and Colette, actually.
Yeah, and the way it grows is really, really interesting. Yeah. And their time apart being so important in that relationship growing.
Yeah.
Because Stephen really doesn't get that collector thing.
No, he really mocks her for it.
Like, even when they're preparing their escape and Colette's like, look at all this cool stuff we've got, this will come in useful. And he's like, I mean, sure, like I forget what he says is useful, but he's like, yeah, like that, like the rope could be great, but what are we going to do with feathers?
Yeah. And she's like, oh, but Poppy really loves feathers.
Yeah, that's the one. Because there's a couple where she like defends herself, and she's like, no, that could be useful. And he's like, the feathers, and she's like, yeah, but they're pretty.
And what did you think about the perspective on the Iggly Blebber at the end? So the sheep, for those of you not fluent in Growlish.
Oh, without kind of ruining the ending. I mean,
we all know they're going to escape, right?
No,
you know that.
You've ruined it.
You know that from the first page. You know, we've said it. We're not going to say how they escape.
Sure.
We know that it's an escape story that's leading toward these children getting back to safety.
But don't ruin the ending of Throg's.
No, I'm not.
Throg's through line.
So there is a question of whether or not the Iggly Blebber should come with them, the little sheep, the dirty, smelly, confused sheep that got scooped up with them and that we thought had been flushed down the toilet. There's a question of whether it should come with them. And Stephen goes, well, think about it, Poppy. You know, what happens to sheep in our world? We eat them.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
It might actually have a better time here. Put yourself in the shoes of the sheep.
I think the sheep is quite an interesting character because he's always there, and I get this but this constant sense from the sheep that like there is quite a lot of character in there, I guess, but it's just sort of like sure, of course now this is happening. What a great.
Well, and it likes the giant grass. It makes no difference to it eating little grass or eating big grass.
Like he's totally happy wherever. Just like leave me and like be here and eat some grass. That's what I do. Like stop picking me up and putting me in things and putting me in new places and just stop it. I don't care. I don't think the Blebber cares whether they live wherever. It's just like, please. Just let me eat some grass and he just like every time you see him, he's a bit more dishevelled. Like he's had his horns broken and he's a bit more grubby. And it's not
smelly.
It's not totally explicit, but you can just imagine like the light behind its eyes getting dimmer and dimmer. Just like Jesus, what is this day?
But it's another. It's like Gulliver's Travels again, isn't it? Like the little children, notice that that Barlam is getting more and more dishevelled, but the giants just think it's this cute little fluffy thing. Yeah. They don't see the detail that it's getting grubbier, that its horn is broken. It's an object to them.
Its conception is about playing with perception, isn't it? Because it's switching.
It's all about perspective. Read it to a set of siblings.
Yeah, because the communal thing of the language.
Yeah. I think that's it for this week.
I think so, yeah.
So that was episode 3 of Even the Trunchbull.
Thanks for listening.
Once again, if you've any thoughts on the books that you loved as a kid,
or love now as a kid,
let us know, or ask a grown-up to let us know. We're at eventhetrunchbull@gmail.com or on Twitter at trunchbullpod.
The intro music for this episode and every episode is What a Wonderful Day by Shane Ivers.
And remember, kids' books can be for everyone because we've all been kids. Even the Trunchbull. Ta-ta!